Okay, my phone says that the 7 o'clock hour has arrived, so I will call the Monday, February 1st, 2021 meeting of the Hastings Planning Commission to order. We'll begin with roll call. Please remember to indicate if you are in the city of Hastings, so we can keep that in compliance with the state requirements. Bowers,
Here at Win Hastings.
Brem,
Here in the city of Hastings.
Zarnicki,
Here in the city of Hastings.
Denton,
Here, Nashville.
Foster,
Here, city of Hastings.
Mauer,
Here, city of Hastings.
Rezegi,
Here, city of Hastings.
Tassava,
Here, city of Hastings.
and Hatfield, also present and in the city of Hastings. If you'll please stand, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
With
with
liberty and
justice
justice for all.
For all.
Thank you. You have received a proposed agenda. Do we have any proposed additions or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the agenda as distributed?
Motion, Foster.
Second, Mauer.
Okay. Motion by Foster, support by Mauer. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Thank you. Next item is the approval of the minutes of our January 4th, 2021 regular meeting. Any corrections?
I make a motion for approval.
Support, Tassava.
Okay, we have a motion by Bowers and support by Tassava. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Okay. We have no information items this evening. Public hearings. We do have a public hearing scheduled to solicit comment on an amendment to section 90-473 subparagraph I to add density and design considerations for residential uses in the B1 Central Business District. Dan, you want to introduce this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, as the text amendment reads, and Rebecca did a nice job of putting her staff report together. Currently, the B1 district allows for residential units on the second and third floor of downtown areas, except for areas such as Court and Apple and Center Street. And so what this would do is this would allow Planning Commission a considerable amount of latitude when discussing higher density projects than currently what the district allows. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca and she can introduce her staff report and give the highlights.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan. So I know you have the text in front of you, but I think it would be easy if I told you the reason it was even drafted, and then then that translation makes sense. The goals were twofold. Number one, there is nothing that specifically states that a commercial entity can be located within a residential building. It says the opposite, right? So you currently can have residential in commercial, right? You can have it upstairs and you can have and it gives you the standards. Well, then you went in last year and you amended your B1 to allow for different kinds of residential development under, with special land uses in certain locations. Only it's not clear as currently drafted that in one of those residential developments, you could have a commercial use within that building. It's implied because commercial is allowed within the B1 district, but nothing says that for sure. So subsection 4 was added, number 1, to clarify that. And then since we were clarifying that, we used language that's very similar to what you have as an allowed use, where you're allowing residential in with commercial. So here you're allowing commercial in with residential, and only where it's 2 stories or greater. So that's the purpose of that. The second part, which is the rest of that in bold, which is what's on your screen, really is designed to give the Planning Commission flexibility on density. When you went in and amended your ordinance to include the residential components 1 through 3, you had density standards there. Then the thought was that perhaps there's merit to giving the Planning Commission some latitude on that. It might be 1 unit, it might be 2 units above that established density, but you're really working in areas where you're trying to target redevelopment. And I think the thought is you would hate to have a rehab project in front of you that needed the 9 units or the 10 units to make the project work. And it was a project that you supported, but because of the 8-unit density, you wouldn't be able to do that without a variance. And so this language is identical to the density latitude language that you have available in your PUD language. So you would be considering the same kinds of things that you would be looking at if you're looking at a PUD, right? That idea of flexibility where it meets your intent. So that's the purpose of those 2 provisions, what they are intended to achieve, and where you might find language comparable to that in your ordinance.
Okay, thank you, Rebecca. Questions for, pardon?
I said you're welcome.
Oh, questions for either Dan or Rebecca? All right, I will declare the public hearing open. If there's anyone that would like to make comment within the public hearing, if you'll please identify yourself and your address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. Anyone? All right, seeing none, I'll declare the public hearing closed and ask what your preference is. I think that this helps tidy up the fact that as to how we can have a mixture of residential and commercial properties in our central business district, but still preserves the essential intent that we expressed a year ago, that properties on the primary streets retain their resident or their commercial retail character.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we accept this and forward it to council for approval.
Okay.
I
Motion
second.
by,
Support.
pardon?
Rezegi support.
All right. Motion by Brem, support by Rezegi to adopt the language as presented and forward that on to City Council for their approval. Questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Okay. Old business. JPA, JPC, Jerry?
Both the JPA and JPC meetings were canceled in the month of January, so nothing to report.
Okay. Dan, work task list, anything you want to comment on?
Yes, thank you, Dave. Per our discussion at last month's meeting, if you refer to, number 14 and number 15 in the work task list, number 14, we've had this in one shape or form, the accessory use dwelling units in residential neighborhoods for additional residential housing alternatives. That was discussed last month as an item we wanted to highlight again and move forward during the coming months for review of a text amendment change to our residential districts. And also I want to point out, as a result of that same discussion last month, number 15 is to consider two-family dwelling units, duplexes, as permitted uses in the R1, R2, RR, RS, and R1A residential zoning districts. As you know, currently two-family dwellings in the residential districts are only allowed on state highways. So there's multiple areas in the city and the residential districts where two-family residence, a duplex, could serve as infill, or even the possibility of conversion of a larger single-family residence into a two-family residence. So I wanted to point that out for the work task list.
Comments?
Yes. Mr. Hatfield, I'd like to see these things move up in front and get working on them. This is something that the Blue Zone had basically suggested to us about 2 years ago, and we've kind of dropped the ball on it, and we desperately need housing here in the city of Hastings.
Personally, I would agree with that, and it's not just Blue Zones. I mean, the Chamber Economic Development Alliance has been heard a lot from their membership about the need for housing and to help them attract additional employees in. So it's a hot topic out there, and I think we need to accelerate our consideration of that. That okay? Can I just have a show of interest on that? I see Chelsea, Tom, Jordan, Dave.
Well, I can put my 2 cents in on it, Mr. Chairman. I've been talking to Dan about this. You know, we have a lot of, just driving around, you see a lot of spots out there where, we could put duplexes in. The lots are big enough. Then I'm kind of reminded too of all the spots that are, that aren't on state highway that I see that are duplexes. So I don't know how at what point in time those came that way, but I'm definitely I'm in favor of moving these up on the task list.
Well, I think you raise a good point. If you drive around, it certainly appears that we have quite a few properties that are being used as multifamily, even though they are not considered as such on our tax rolls and don't fit our definition of it. So I think that as we move forward with this, we need to also be mindful of how are we going to enforce any ordinance that we do put in place and make sure that it is something that we can enforce and promote, so that we perhaps slow down the conversion of residential to multifamily where it's not desirable. Any other comments? Well, Dan, I think you and Rebecca have got direction to accelerate those to the top or near the top of our list and start developing some recommendations for our consideration.
Yep, this is Dan, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, and we'll start working on that immediately.
Okay, great. Any other comments for Dan on the work task list?
How about small housing? That may be something we might want to look at too.
I was gonna ask the same thing. We've got a lot of smaller lots that you couldn't build a house on with the setback requirements currently. I know that was discussed, but I think we need to continue to move forward with opportunities for that as well.
I would agree. It kind of all fits in the same basket, although I think it's probably the highest urgency is the conversion of single family to multifamily in certain circumstances. The small house movement has, I think, to some degree, the initial excitement has proven difficult to follow through on, and there are, all kinds of additional issues with permitting that. But we should take a look at what's going on there as well.
I got one
Okay.
question on that, Dave.
Yes, sir.
With these small lots like that, or I know I was just looking at this here, and we're talking about consider accessory use buildings. Is it something where, we're talking about residential neighborhoods for using accessory buildings? Is that something where we'd want to pitch something in there about a small house behind a primary home? Like we talked about mother-in-law quarters, stuff like that. Is that something that would fit in that item number 14 with the tiny houses maybe?
Yes, I think it definitely is one way that could be interpreted.
Yeah, Dave, the accessory dwelling units, ADUs, as they refer to them, is a very workable thing for urban areas, and a lot of communities have those. And you're right, they're referred to a lot of different ways, right? Guest houses or granny flats or mother-in-law homes. But the whole idea is that they are within accessory buildings behind principal dwellings or attached to principal dwellings. And I think I even mentioned this last month, and then I must have not done it. But I have a lot of information and some draft text that I'll forward to Dan that can be distributed to the Planning Commission for when this is on your agenda. And if that's next month, that's fabulous, because that's an easy thing to do. It is different from the cottage housing or the tiny home development, but it serves a similar purpose.
Well, I think if you can at least start helping us become better informed, and at some time, hopefully not too far down the road, we probably would want to consider inviting the council to a joint workshop regarding all of these issues.
Sounds good.
Okay. We'll expect to get some additional reading put in front of us. Anything else for Dan on the work task list? Okay, review the final draft of part 2 of the master plan update. Dan, is anything you want to say before we let Rebecca get into that?
No, as you all recall, and hopefully you all did receive it, prior to the Planning Commission packet being distributed, we did distribute the master plan part 2 document. And we wanted to get that ahead of you, more than a week in advance, just so you could review it for the content. And, if there's any questions specifically, ask those tonight of either Rebecca or myself, so that we can move forward with getting this in front of the city council as soon as we're comfortable with it. With that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
All righty. So I know there's one new member, right? Probably the rest of you already know this, but I'll just do a very quick summary. The second part of the master plan was really intended to have an absolute primary focus on action. So rather than just being a section in the plan or a couple of pages at the end of the plan, the idea was to have the focus of the master plan actually be on how to get things done or what to do to get them done. The action plan, the structure of it was essentially 4 of the focus elements in part 1 were highlighted as the most important things for the city: housing, business growth, infrastructure, and partnering or partnerships and collaboration. And then within each of those 4 primary silos, the master plan committee essentially selected work tasks that McKenna completed for the purpose. Work tasks meaning, it was research that was done or surveys or field work or what have you. And as a result of those work tasks, then it resulted in action strategies where for each silo, then you have quite a few action strategies for how to move the objectives in those sort of areas of emphasis, how to move them forward very specifically, not just broad brush objectives, but here are things that you can do. Because it is part of the master plan, you do have your future land use map, and you do have your zoning plan. Those are 2 requirements of a master plan. So both of those things are contained in this second part of the master plan. Future land use map, as you know, is the premise for your zoning and your zoning ordinance. The zoning plan, it's called a zoning plan because that's how it's referenced in the Planning Act. And the purpose of the zoning plan is to demonstrate how the future land use designations in the master plan translate into zoning districts so that you're not guessing how that's done. So the zoning plan does just that. That's contained in this. And then lastly, there is a compilation of all of the action strategies, because the format of the plan is that under each work task completed, it discusses here was what the work task was, here were the results of the work task, and then the action strategies are identified right there. But then in the end, it compiles all of those action strategies into an action plan where there is actually some categorization put to it in terms of what bodies would be responsible, how long that might take, who should champion it, and sort of priority, short-term, long-term. So that really constitutes the bulk of the action plan, right? So the focus areas, the work strategies, the future land use map, the zoning plan, and then the actual action plan itself, which compiles everything that's described in that. I do think it went to that, I know it went to the master plan committee, and they have forwarded it on to you. And like Dan mentioned, I know you've had it for a week anyway. So hopefully, if you have questions or comments, I would love to get your feedback.
Thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome.
Questions, comments?
Of the amount of detail this has and how it really gets into those, specific strategies. I think it's just, there's a lot more meat here than I'm used to seeing in other master plans I've read. So kudos to everybody who's worked on this.
Well, it's taken us a long time, but I think the time spent for the most part was well worth it in terms of having a document that will be a little more explicit in terms of helping us in future decision making. Okay, any other comments? Are we ready to forward this to council?
If you need a motion, I'll make the motion.
We do. Motion by Foster,
Support, Lillis.
support by Bowers. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, any comments from you regarding issues that you see that could be problematic with the council?
I really didn't see anything, Dave. I went over this. I'm sure there's probably something I missed, but I didn't see anything that stuck out, and everything we worked on, I think we addressed it.
Everything looked good to me, Dave.
Okay. Well, I would agree. So any other questions or comments? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same. Okay, thank you. And Rebecca, please extend our thanks to your team. It's been quite an effort.
Will do.
All right. Next item is Dan's report, tracking report. Dan, anything you want to comment on?
No, the only addition, Mr. Chairman, is the addition of the Royal Coach PUD for the amended site plan approval that Planning Commission approved on January 4th. We've added the conditions of approval, which include the parking lot lighting detail, stormwater management, landscaping. As you recall, the Planning Commission did give approval to staff to do administrative approval once those issues are addressed. So with that, there's no other changes or deletions.
What about Ravenna?
Ravenna Holdings,
Yes.
they have, I believe as of last Friday or possibly today, will be receiving their preliminary building permits for their project on Woodlawn Avenue. I know they've been working with Travis Tate for infrastructure issues. He's been working with the lead manager of that project and some of their engineering firms. So with that activity being addressed by professional code inspections, they now have met their site plan requirement of receiving a building permit.
They have received it?
Yes, I believe it was either going to be issued last Friday or today, which would meet because their site plan would have expired this coming Thursday.
Okay, any other questions? I guess, Dan, just a quick note of explanation on that. I think the confusion is that the compliance date on your report was January 6th, not February 6th.
I believe January 6th was of 2020 is when Planning Commission extended the site plan approval through February 4th of 2021.
Okay. I guess just for future clarification, probably the date that we ought to use in this is not our action. It's the date that they have to comply by.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you, Dave.
Okay. All right. Any other questions for Dan? All right. And we can now go to item E, which is to discuss the draft ordinance regarding the keeping of chickens as prepared by Rebecca's team. Dan, you gonna kick this off or you?
Yes, yep, I will, Dave. Yes, you had asked, or the planning commission had asked at last month's meeting to reach out to planning commission members regarding areas or issues, likes, dislikes of both the draft ordinance and some of the other ordinances that municipalities had used. So I had a very good response from the planning commission members, and I made note of all the responses, and I compiled all of those, and I gave those to Rebecca for her to review and to whether it be add or delete from the text amendment language that will be in front of you tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Yes, that was very helpful. So I took your comments from the planning commission meeting and people's review comments on the sample ordinances, and then the written responses or feedback that Dan got, and made the changes. So let me just highlight what those changes are for you. Because there were a couple of areas where planning commissioners had expressed it was equal in terms of those in support and those in opposition. And so then I had to pick. So instead of, maybe I shouldn't point that out, right? But I do want to highlight that so that you know where maybe you want to change that. So the first thing is on the opening remark, I have, or sort of the qualifying statement, I have taken out the requirement that it be a special land use permit. None of the other ordinances, sample ordinances, did that. I had included that for Hastings back in 2019, whenever I gave this to you initially, because I know there was a lot of reservation about sort of doing this anyway. And so I thought that's an option for you, which it remains an option. But after the conversation, I felt like there was more support for simply having it with the standards that you want as an accessory use for an owner-occupied single-family home. So that is how that opening statement reads. The only thing I've taken out is the special land use element. And there was support expressed for it being owner-occupied, and that was in there and remains in there. There was no change to the first provision. The second provision, there was no change to that. There was support expressed from 2 planning commission members of the numbers of chickens that are suggested in that regulation, the maximum. And then there was almost unanimous support for not allowing roosters. So that's in that section too. This provision remains unchanged, but I wanted to highlight that there was specific support for the components of that. Provision 3, there was, this is where we talk about the enclosure and the fenced area. And I think this bears maybe just pointing out that this is kind of where we talk about what I think some were calling free roaming. So this provision does not allow for, it didn't in its initial state either, it does not allow for free roaming. What it allows for is that you have to have your chicken enclosure in the rear. But what it allows for is if you happen to have your chicken enclosure, your coop or whatever you want to call it, and it's in your rear yard, and your rear yard is fenced, then it allows for your chickens to be able to roam within your fenced rear yard. And that's not the same as free roaming. It's not like they can just go all over the place, which they can in rural areas. So in that sense, it's not free roaming. However, there are ordinances that simply say that the chickens must be provided a covered enclosure and kept in the covered enclosure or in a joined fence enclosure at all times. So that is less room. So that would essentially be is that they would have a coop and a fenced enclosure within a fenced rear yard. And so you would be requiring them to fence their enclosure even if they were in a fenced rear yard. If you took out that element. So There were several planning commission members who indicated support for what I'm going to call free roaming, otherwise, i.e. being able to roam within a fenced rear yard. But there was a planning commission member who expressed concern with that provision. I have left it in since there were some who supported it, but I would say that if it is the consensus of the planning commission that they don't like that idea, what we would take out is that middle sentence, because that's what would be allowing it outside of the fenced enclosure if the rear yard was fenced. So that's what we would remove if that's your point of consensus. I did add the last sentence, which was to essentially indicate that the fencing used does have to meet your fencing standards, and that is a new provision. Number 4, there is no change to that. There was one expression of support for the setbacks that are proposed in here, and these are comparable to what you already have in your ordinance for your residential district, and I did not modify that. Number 5, this is essentially the same provision with the addition of the second sentence. If that is, I'm sorry, in the middle sentence, before it just said the enclosure shall be constructed in workmanlike manner. I noticed that in a couple of the sample ordinances we looked at, they were very specific about, you could see what the concern was that you don't want the chicken where they're being kept to begin to look like, that they just used whatever was in the garage or something. And so I thought, if you are inclined to sort of put those kinds of standards in this, here would be language that was similar to what was found in some of the ordinances, and I thought it might be of interest to you. It is new, and there was only one expression of support for this provision. I mean, in general. So this is a new addition, and you might want to see if you like that too. Number 6, there was no change to that, and that's pretty common to most ordinances. In number 7, this is really your nuisance provision. You'll notice there's a blank there. That is because I do not know, and I could not find on the website the number associated with your nuisance ordinance, and so it's possible you don't have one, and if so, we'll need to modify that. But essentially, it's subjecting the keeping of it to any of your nuisance standards, and generally those have to do with noise and smell and that kind of thing. The first sentence was an addition as kind of a qualifying statement that was in several of the sample ordinances, and I thought that might I added that to sort of boost that statement so that it was a little bit heavier in the maintenance side. Number 8, there is no change to that. There was quite a bit of support expressed for continuing to keep that provision. And honestly, the bulk of the planning commissioners' interest, where they were saying, here's what I like and here's what I don't like, really had to do sort of with the process, right? The permitting and the inspections related to it. So here I've added some new things, and I wanted to point out where you're going to have to pick because it was tied as to what people wanted. So the first provision is a new statement. It was not in before because it's a special land use permit. It was a different process. Here, by making the review and approval administrative, you want to set out your permit process, which is what I've done so in this new number 9. So first, that you're requiring that they have to obtain a permit. Now, this is prior to the acquiring of the chickens. Some ordinances have that. Others don't specify that, but I think the intent here is don't get everything and then as you're going out trying to decide whether or not they meet the standards, that the chickens are running around. So the idea here is that you get permission and you have the facility not only approved, but constructed prior to bringing in the chickens. The process is that the application is made through the clerk, which is standard, and that the fee obviously would be set by council, and all of that's very typical. Now, the second provision includes the statement of an inspection prior to issuing the permit. Here is where there was a difference of opinion. There were those in support of it and those who did not feel that was necessary. So you'll want to sort of highlight that as something you want to see if you have consensus on. But the idea being is that the permit isn't issued until it is confirmed that it has been developed in compliance. And then lastly is this idea of whether or not it's going to be a permit that expires. There were a handful of the Planning Commission that was supportive of an expiration of a 3 to 5 year permit length of time. And there was some that were not in support of that. I have included it in here. Again, easy to take out if you decide that's not what you want. But, you know, you don't usually have that, but most, I'll have to say, because usually when you're issuing permits for things, you know, it's just issued. Although sometimes the community will have a permit that expires, like a sign permit or something like that. And the idea really being is that it gives the community the opportunity to confirm that there is compliance with the permit outside of your normal enforcement process. And it also gives you the chance to apply new standards if you adopt any, because an expiration of a permit means, you know, sort of a renewal of a permit is a new permit. So if you had any new standards, they would apply at that time. So that would be the benefit of that if you were so inclined. Obviously, there was differences of opinion on that. So that is a synopsis of this particular text and how it is consistent with direction provided by the commission. So you don't know, I'm really curious to hear what you think.
Me too. So with that being said, we'll open it up for questions and comments. Mr. Mayor?
I like pretty much everything she's written there. I was probably the one that said that I don't want chickens roaming around the fenced in yard, but after thinking about it, you know, I think it's kind of dumb to, you know, you're gonna have to spend money to build a chicken coop, and then you're gonna fence it in. It'd be kind of stupid to fence it in when you got a fenced in backyard. So I kind of relaxed my stance on that. I do agree that, you know, unlike a fence permit, you know, the requirements here are similar to what a fence permit is, other than this will have an expiration time on it. And I think I'd like to see the 5 years left in there personally, but other than that, I think it looks pretty good.
I think the only thing I would ask Dave, because one of the provisions here that I guess is probably most influential in my thinking as to how we could do this is the 40-foot setback from any residential dwelling on an adjacent property. And if we just allow them to free roam within a fenced backyard, that's not going to come into play, and you could get them a heck of a lot closer to a neighboring dwelling than the 40 feet.
Right.
I also wonder if, in terms of even mentioning fencing, we need to make any statement about the fencing needs to be of such type that it precludes even the young hatchlings from.
Well, and I agree with that. And I thought probably we could put something in there that talked about that, because if you have a traditional board on board fence and you let chickens roam, they're going to get through there.
Yeah.
So I agree with that, you know, and that I kind of, you know, I kind of thought what we'd have to do when we go out and inspect, you know, we're going to have some kind of regulation that talks about the different type of fencing if we allow them to roam. Now, if we're not allowing them to roam, they would have some kind of chicken wire or something around their enclosure, I would think, under their chicken coop. So, 6 one, half a dozen the other. I just, if a person's got a board-on-board fence or a chain link fence back there, can we allow them to roam? Because I know the chickens gonna get through there.
Well, that was my concern, if I can speak.
Yep.
To free roam those, like you said, Mayor, the chickens are gonna be right up next to the neighbor's house. Dogs barking at it, it was I probably was one that said I didn't want them to be able to free roam, so.
Yeah.
I have a concern about number 5. Out of how these are built, out of paper or cardboard or
Because it can't
fabric.
be.
I
Because it can't
I
be.
question that.
That says they can't be, Lois, not that they can be.
Okay, I'm
Those
sorry.
those are exclusions.
I'm good.
I have a concern about the free roaming part of the chicken into the backyard. Being an old farm boy myself, I know what it's like to have chickens, of course, a lot more than 4. But the smell of a chicken, what they leave behind them can get pretty aromatic in the summertime. And if you kind of picture that and then letting them run all over your backyard, your neighbor is not going to appreciate that at all, because wind drifts that smell. And
Thank you, John.
cleaning it up is not easy if you let them run all over the backyard, where if they're contained into a small, say 10 by 10 foot fenced in area, it's easier to clean up.
Well, I'm kind of confused. Sounds to me like there's more than just one person that want to let it free range. I agree with what you're saying. I thought that right along that if we say they have to be in an enclosure, if they have to be in a chicken coop or a fenced-in enclosure, that would solve the issue with the fence type. It would solve the issue with setbacks and all that. So, I guess I'm open to whatever the majority of you want to do with this.
I would just chime in and say, I never envisioned, I guess the chickens roaming backyards up to fences. I just, within the city, that wasn't what I visualized. So I guess I would agree with what's been said, if that's reasonable.
I mean, I think that, I understand the popularity of being self-sufficient, I guess, and it's become kind of fashionable to raise chickens for your own consumption. But I have this nagging thought that it puts us at the top of a fairly slippery slope when next it's ducks and geese and potbelly pigs,
There you go.
or miniature goats, or any of those things. And people live in town for a reason. They live in town for a multitude of reasons, but I think one reason is they don't want to be next to a farm that produces odors. And I can remember when my son worked at Herbrooks, the large chicken or egg producer up in Ionia. Man, he was required to change clothes outside the house and not to bring the clothes indoors with him. It's not good. So to me, if we're going to do this, it's not because we're changing the basic character of what it's like to live in town. I think that we need to be cautious about putting enough restrictions on it that it doesn't get carried away. And to me, that means that we don't allow them to free roam within a fenced backyard, that we keep them confined to a coop and adjacent fenced area that doesn't exceed some rather modest size.
I think you're right, Dave.
Hey,
So can
Dave,
I-
on a practical level, because I've raised chickens, the fence would have to be at least 6 feet tall, and then even then, if the chickens are threatened, they could go over even a 6 foot high fence. And so leaving it just as a fenced in backyard, that's probably not securing them.
Right. No, I would agree, Tom. I think that, yeah, a coop and maybe an enclosed fenced area adjacent to the coop that includes a top. Yeah.
Right. So I was one who was in support of free range at first, mostly because when I was reading what was proposed, in my mind, it was build a coop, lock them in. And I definitely don't think that that is humane, but I do think build a coop, build a fenced and covered area. And that's more what I was picturing. Definitely not, go all over the yard and the city. So I would definitely be in support of removing the fully fenced yard part, as long as there is a fenced enclosure, not just keeping them locked up in the coop all day, their whole lives.
Rebecca, you've got the primary statement that you said, the E, you've got it written as in any residential district. And I know we had talked about it last meeting, the larger districts, RS or the RR is this discussion kind of eliminating that? Because if we are considering that, then there are some properties that are larger that could allow, an element or a type of free range if we maintain a larger buffer. And that 40 foot, I think if you don't have animals running within 40 feet of your neighbors, what's the harm then?
Yeah, I guess, Tom, I know this came up last month, and I think I indicated my interpretation of it at that point is we are considering this to expand the keeping of chickens into areas where it is not currently permitted. We are not trying to further restrict those areas where they already are permitted, because I don't think we've had any complaints about the way it has existed in those areas. So
I just read that in any district
yeah,
as maybe redefining things, but
yeah, no, I would agree. I would prefer that exempt the areas where they're already permitted.
okay.
I will make that change.
And then the other thing is where we're excluding materials, and I think I talked about this last month as well, but fabric, that's net, and netting is a suitable, lid top to these fenced in areas. Is there a better way that we can write fabric excluding netting? Or am I just misinterpreting what netting is, that no one would ever consider it as fabric?
Let me look it up. And I'll see what the best way to word that.
Okay, so to try to bring some
Can I make one
closure.
comment, Dave, before we close?
Okay.
Number 3, with the fenced enclosures shall be subject to the fence and wall screen. I looked that up, and in our fence, the materials that are allowed, it says that woven wire is not allowed in the fencing, wall, and screens area. So I think if we tie that to have to meet the same requirements that are in our fencing, we're taking away the use of chicken wire in that enclosure. And I don't know if that's what we want to do or not.
Yeah,
We do not.
we'll want to change with taking out the rear yard element.
Yep.
We'll want to change this.
Well, I just noticed that the last sentence you said, if we take it
Yeah.
out, Rebecca, you take the middle sentence out, but the last sentence says fenced enclosures shall be subject to the Division 90 fencing. In that,
Yeah.
it does say materials cannot be woven wire.
Yeah, I had added that when I thought the rear yards could be used. But no, that's a really good point. If we're just talking about enclosures, then chicken enclosures, we will not want to use that, and that's a good observation.
Actually, Jerry, that raises an interesting point. Why isn't chain link fall under woven wire?
It does state in here that chain link is allowed,
Oh, okay,
but you can't have chain link fence with the slats in it.
okay,
But it does state in there that chain link is allowed, but woven wire is not.
okay.
Yeah, which would be chicken wire, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. I think that's what the intent is behind, is that it's not the chicken wire for your
Yeah.
fencing and when you're using
Okay.
it for general fence.
Well, at
Mr.
this
Chairman, I
point,
have
let me try to start reaching some conclusions. Given the restrictions that we're talking about here with the modifications that we've just finished discussing, how many are in favor of approving an ordinance?
I am.
Show of hands, please. Okay, Lois, I can't see a hand for you,
No,
so,
but I moved to Hastings. I lived on a farm. I moved to Hastings, so I didn't have to be around all these animals. That's all I gotta say.
okay, so you are a no vote at this time.
I'm a no vote.
Okay, so at this point, we have a majority in favor of going ahead and approving an ordinance. I think the next question is, are we willing to take what we have in front of us with the modifications that we have directed Rebecca and Dan to make, and go ahead and set a public hearing for next month? Or do we want this to come back to us one more time for a final reading before we set the public hearing?
We keep finding all these little issues with it. I think we ought to bring it back again for a
I
public hearing.
agree. I agree with Dave. We need to bring it back to us one more time and go over it again.
I know we've talked about this, Dave, but I agree with Tom. One of the things, is there, he's talking about having some form of, netting. I would think that could be over the enclosure, the fenced in enclosure. Do we need to split this out where we're talking about the building material of the chicken coop and then the building material of the enclosure? Do we need to split those out separately so we better understand that? Because every time we're talking about enclosure, I'm thinking about the chicken coop.
Correct.
So that's just thought.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
I
you're
mean,
right. You're right, Dave. The covered enclosure is the coop, and number 5 is supposed to be about the coop. But if that's confusing, then you're right. I should go in there and improve that.
Well,
I think it would make sense
Yep.
to have two parts to that. One, the coop itself, and the second, any attached enclosure. And yeah, we're limiting what both of those can be, but it's not necessarily the same. What would work for one doesn't necessarily work for the other.
Right.
Yeah, the covered enclosure is the coop, and the fenced enclosure is the adjacent.
Yes.
And the material limitation is just for the coop. But yeah, with Tom bringing up maybe some preferences for material for the fenced enclosure, maybe you're right. You'd like to see a second provision that deals strictly with that. So we can.
I think that would be a good idea. Okay, then I'm going to ask that Dan and Rebecca further refine the language for this proposed ordinance and bring that back to us at our next meeting. Everybody okay with that?
Yep.
All right. Then we'll move on to new business, selection of officers for 2021.
I make a motion that we keep the officers that we have for 2021.
Support.
Are there other nominations?
Yeah, you're not getting out of that easy.
No.
Yeah. All right, we have a motion and support. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same. Tom and I thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
And Jerry. I assume we don't have to have a treasurer, do we, Jerry? Just a chair, vice chair, and secretary?
Yeah, I think that's all we need.
Okay.
Don't have any meat.
It's probably more than we need, but that's okay. All right. Item 8B, consider setting a public hearing for our March meeting to consider a text amendment to Division 90-6-14, Section 90-552 by adding subsection Q, commercial recreational facilities as permitted use in the D1 industrial zoning district.
Make a motion, we set public hearing.
Support.
Support.
I
Dan,
did not catch the support. Who did the support?
Mauer.
Mauer? Okay, thanks.
just clarify for me what we are doing here as opposed to what we have already done regarding the commercial recreational facilities?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Dan. Yes, the city council at last Monday's meeting did, with the second reading, approve adding commercial recreational facilities as a definition in the 90-1. And in doing so, they also amended the adding of commercial recreational facilities as a subsection of the business 1 zoning district, which automatically flows to the business 2 district. So this text amendment would be a text amendment to the D1 industrial zone, allowing the definition of commercial recreational facilities be added in subsection Q as a permitted use.
Actually, Dan, is that your interpretation of what Brenda was concerned with?
I believe her concern was the definition itself of commercial recreational facilities.
Right, but I mean, we've done everything that's necessary, and the council has done everything necessary to permit other recreational facilities in the D1 and D2 districts. Am I correct?
Just in the B is the boy 1, which flows to the B2 district. We'll need a separate text amendment for the D1 industrial district, because right now commercial recreational facility is not listed as a permitted use in the D1 district.
Okay, I was thinking that's where we had already added it.
No, it was, was that Becky?
Yeah, I'm looking for that too, because I thought that's what did we miss that?
I believe when I looked through it with Dan, we added the definition, but then we said it was a use in the B1 for business. So it was not included in the D1 and what went to council.
Okay, because the whole request that stimulated this to begin with was a question of building a new facility in the industrial zone.
Yep.
Right. And I believe the reason why, Dave, was if city council did not move forward with the actual definition itself, that there would be no reason to add a definition that didn't exist to the D1 district, since that segment of that definition was already in the B1 and B2 districts. So we just wanted to keep the flow going in an orderly fashion, and making sure that we weren't getting the cart in front of the horse.
Okay, well, I think the one thing that I will say is that I'm really not concerned. I told Commissioner McNabb Staines that we would at some point review that language, because she thought that we were a little too verbose, Rebecca, in listing a number of very specific uses and then putting a very general term at the end of it, and wondered why it had to be that complex. And I think that that's something that we can address later on the work task list. We've got a task in there to clean up our language, and I think it fits under that. If we actually have to do this to really permit the facility that raised the question in the first place, then fine. But I don't think it needs to be more than that at this time.
So my recollection was that what you guys actually did was define commercial recreation. You replaced it with commercial recreation facility. So it's a single term. And then in your definition, you define it, where in definitions you can be verbose, right? You're trying to give direction. But she was finding there was concern with the definition.
Yeah,
She just thought, yeah, I mean, it works. She just thought that it was, she wondered why we went into the specificity that we go into at the start of that sentence, and then we get very general at the end of it, and why we can't just find some general term that we can work within. And I'm looking back through the minutes, but I don't find it. So if in fact we need to hold another special hearing on this, then certainly we want to do that. I hope that we're not further holding up the development of that project because of misstating what our intent was.
No, and that, Mr. Chairman, I've had several discussions with the business owner, and I explained to him, back in the fall, October, November, how the process works. So he understood that, and I communicated after the city council also moved forward that this would be the next step in that process. So he is aware of our process.
Okay. I mean, clearly, I think looking back, we could have streamlined this and done it all at one time and probably not confused ourselves or the council as much, but so assuming we need to go ahead and do that, do we have a motion to set a public hearing for our next meeting?
we have a motion and a support, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jerry. Sorry. So we have a motion and support. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Okay. And item C, consider a request from Karen Zuver. And Karen, we appreciate you being with us tonight to set a public hearing at the March 1st meeting to consider a special use permit and site plan approval for the commercial kennel at 1005 East State Street. We've already put forth an ordinance change that has been supported by and approved by City Council to allow that use. So the next and final step in the process is for her to submit the plan so that we can consider a special use permit. Karen, is there anything you want to say? This is rather perfunctory.
No, I just appreciate the opportunity to continue to build the business. So I appreciate all your input and all the work that you guys have done to hopefully make this possible. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, we appreciate you being here. Do we have a motion to set
Make
the
that
public hearing?
motion, Mr. Chairman.
Motion by Tassava,
I'll support it.
motion, support by Brem. Any further discussion? All in favor then, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same. Okay. Open public discussion and comments. If we have anyone who would like to make a comment at this time, please introduce yourself, and you have 3 minutes. All right, we'll move on to commission comments then. Commissioners?
I want to congratulate you, Dave, on your re-election. It was a hard-fought fight, but I'm glad to see you won.
Well, I think my shoulder will be back in its socket probably by the next time we meet, but thank you, David. Other comments?
If you haven't tried some of our outdoor dining facilities that have popped up downtown, be sure to check it out. It's pretty neat, and just kudos to the city staff and council on supporting that. It's a big deal for our restaurants.
Yeah, certainly an important move for, and we appreciate the city's engagement in that, and also the Chamber and the Economic Development Alliance. And Chelsea, I know you personally have been active in that, at least helping to build some of those. So great effort, and particularly if we end up not being able to keep them open, it will become even more important as we go forward. Any other comments? If not, do we have them?
Dave, this is Dan. I also want to throw out a big shout out to the Berry Community Foundation. The Berry Community Foundation secured a very generous donation for placing those outside structures in restaurants throughout Berry County. So again, we'd be remiss to thank Bonnie and the Berry Community Foundation for receiving that large generous donation and putting it to use very quickly.
Thank you, Dan.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Support, Rezegi.
Motion by Bowers, support by Rezegi, that we adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Opposed, same. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you.